All right. Well, good day, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We do have plenty more people coming in, and we appreciate you joining us on a Friday. And it seems like a day and week we could use the self-care and support more than ever. So we're very, very glad to have you joining us today. I'm going to just go through a few intro slides. I'm one of the co-directors of the Northwest MHTTC. My name is Christina Clayton. I'm a social worker and substance use counselor by training and nonprofit behavioral health person by experience. We are here with Rebecca Demerol, who I will explain more later how we know each other and how grateful I am to have her here. But we're real grateful to have you here today. And just to share a little bit about the Northwest MHTTC, the network itself is actually a large network that is supported by the Substance Use and Mental Health Services Administration. Otherwise known as SAMHSA. And so there's a whole network of centers, and they all do events like this. So I just want you to know that if you haven't been to our website, you can also see the main MHTT website, which you can get in the chat later. There's also an addiction technology transfer center and a prevention technology center. There's tons of resources out there. So you can attend all sorts of events from all sorts of centers. But our purview here is in Region 10, so proudly serving Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And what we're really excited to do is share the kinds of training that we can offer you. And often those are around evidence-based practices or other clinical approaches, specifically for folks with experiencing serious mental health issues, but not exclusively. Our workforce, as you imagine, is very broad. So it could be peer counselors, psychiatrists, case managers, housing staff, therapists, any number of folks. And so we do a wide variety of topics. And then our training, we have live events such as this. We have self-paced free online courses. We have resources and a newsletter, so you can get in touch with us, and we'll show you how to do that later. We just like to remind, this is a network sort of effort here, that we use affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language. And also just reminding folks, as I'll say in a moment, this is being recorded. And so want to make sure that folks aren't sharing anything that's potentially confidential. So just like to say that. As far as our housekeeping, wanted to make sure that folks know we've never had an issue with a Zoom webinar or meeting, but in case something weird happens and we have to say farewell quickly, we will get right back to you. That has never happened, but just make sure you know we're on it and do all we can to make it a secure experience. We do have 80-something people today, so we wondered if we might be able to get everybody in a discussion mode, but it's just not possible with that large of a group. So you are muted. Your video is off. We do hope there'll be some time for discussion later. So please know that we have ways for you to submit your questions, and we'll get to those as we can at the end. Slides, there are just a handful of them. We'll make sure we get those available to you after the session, and then certificates, as you've seen in the chat. If you're interested in that, you'll receive an email in a week or two about how to do that. It's not formal CEUs, but there are certificates available. Evaluation. We will send you a link via the chat as well as after the session and tomorrow, and ask that you please just spend a few minutes. Why do you ask? Why do we ask you to do this? It helps us plan future sessions. It really helps us evaluate how did today's webinar actually go, and it helps the presenters, and it helps these free trainings coming, because SAMHSA, they don't have a lot of demands, but they do want to see if people actually came to your events. So it's helpful for SAMHSA to know, oh, people came and they said something. It's confidential, should just take a couple minutes. You really, really help us out. All right, so using the chat, as some of you are doing, it is not visible to other attendees, but I think that you can use the chat for anything that's tech related, or if you're having a non-content question. If you have a question for Rebecca, I will be playing moderator, and so please use the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbox at the bottom, or wherever it is on your screen, to type in your question. If you type it into the chat, I can't transfer it for you. I don't know why, but we'll ask that you put it in the Q&A, and then when we get to that section, we'll hopefully have time for questions. If not, we'll make sure we get an answer to you either way. I already said how we are funded by SAMHSA. They didn't obviously review all this information, so they're just That's our disclaimer there. And here we go. So Rebecca, I am so pleased to have her here today. Rebecca is the founder and director of Trauma Integration Programs, with more than a decade as an ambulance paramedic, 22 years as a paramedic trainer, 18 years of mental health counseling experience, specializing in traumatic stress, and she is a licensed East Asian medicine practitioner and acupuncturist. Rebecca's unique skill set and experience are informed by her own traumatic childhood and teen years spent on the streets and in the foster care system, giving her a special familiarity and empathy for trauma and loss. Personally, I've known Rebecca, I'm not sure how long, but it's been a while, from the Seattle area, which is where I'm from, and would see her at conferences, had her present at meetings that I would do at my last job, and just really, just always had a special place in my heart and always a joy to see her. So grateful that she was able to be with us today. So now we're going to do one little thing, and I'm going to try and explain this quickly so it's not super hard. We want to do a word cloud, how everybody is doing today. So you should be seeing this thing. No one's texted any responses yet. But what you want to do, oops, I went too far. You're going to text this set of letters in the content to the number, like a phone number, to 22333. And then it'll say you've joined this poll. And then your next text message, when you dial 22333 and you put that in the box, you'll then be able to text your message. So I actually had done this earlier so you could kind of see. I don't know if this will show. I can't see myself in the screen anymore, so that won't really help you. But you can also do the web-based version. And so let's see if anyone is able to get some responses in. So for example, I will say I am excited for this. Some people are working. Great. Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. So it'll say you've joined the session, and then the next text you write to this number, it'll show up on the screen. So we'll give folks a couple minutes. Let's see. For those of you that are putting in the chat, it doesn't go to here, but I will put it in my version, so it'll still show up. Because tired, that was my other option for today, but excited also. Luckily, we can have more than one emotion. All right, Rebecca, are you getting a good sense of where everybody is? All right, overwhelmed. That's the truth. Lots of emotions all the time right now. Rebecca, you just wave a hand when you're ready for us to move on, because I don't want to rush people. I also want to. You ready for me to move on? Okay. Well, I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and really grateful for your participation. I'm going to let Rebecca go ahead and take back over with the good stuff, and she'll take it from here. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Aha! By the miracle of technology, I've unmuted myself. Hi, everybody. Welcome today. I'm so happy to see you. And thank you for putting your responses in that, that cloud, because to me, that was really touching. It was like being in the room with you and just gauging how everybody's doing. And I really get that everybody's, not everybody, but I get that a lot of you are tired and a lot of you are excited and a lot of you are anxious, and there's so many beautiful responses. I wish I had a poster for my wall of all of that. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking Coast Salish people. So this is their land, and I am a visitor here. So let me invite you to start with by taking a couple deep breaths with me, and this will help me too just kind of settle into the room with you all. So And just, I'm going to be talking a lot about breathing today. So let's just take another breath together. So for the last, I don't know how long, I feel like I've been holding my breath. I feel like a lot of us have been holding our breath. And that's actually a trauma response. It's actually what happens when we experience something traumatic, that we just kind of gasp and we hold our breath. And not only are we collectively holding our breath in an emotional way, but also in a physical way. But many people around the world are struggling to breathe because of COVID. And there's a lot of people that have stopped breathing and are no longer with us anymore due to COVID, but also due to racial violence and all over the world, not just in the US, it exists everywhere. And I also think of migrants fleeing their violence in their countries and trying to get to other places where unfortunately many of them are not welcome when they arrive. So that's something to hold in our hearts today. Okay, I'm going to forward the slides. I have called this series, We Make the Path by Walking, after a poem written by 19th century Spanish poet Antonio Machado. And just part of it, I'll roughly sort of paraphrase, and it's been translated into English. And he says, "Wanderer, your footsteps are the road and nothing more. Wanderer, there is no road. The road is made by walking." And that really feels like what's happening right now with all of us. We don't know what's next, and we're just kind of walking along, and the steps that we make are the path. So as we're walking along, that's the path. Okay. And I'm going backwards with my slides, so how about don't mind me. So there we go. So the purpose and objective and process for what I'm here for and what we're all here for today is, of course, to process. I really want to work with you to talk a lot about breath and a lot about allowing ourselves to feel some of the things that we may have been kind of clamped down and not allowing ourselves to feel, and to integrate a lot of the difficult stuff that we've experienced, say in the past year especially, and also to experience some of the good stuff too, to really integrate that into ourselves. And, I'll be doing a talk. We don't have room for an open forum because we have lots of folks today, and thank you so much for joining. I hope we'll have some time for a little bit of Q&A, and I'm going to be giving you some self-care exercises throughout. And I'm going to stop wiggling my chair around. It's just, I'm excited. It's a habit. I just caught myself swinging back and forth. Of course, the purpose, yes, is to integrate and to build community and connect with each other and share and learn. And as we share and learn, we heal, and you heal and I heal at the same time. And we build our personal resilience. So I'm hoping you come out of today feeling stronger and more supported, less alone, and you'll have some self-care skills that you can keep with you and hold in your heart and keep in your pocket to bring with you wherever you go and share with other people. And of course, in order to have all this, we need our open hearts and open minds. And we listen to as we listen to me and as we listen to one another. And some of what you hear today from me might even seem a little bit strange or weird, but just bear with me and know that weird is the new normal. So just don't panic. It's all good. Okay, there we go. So the first thing I want to talk about with you is a trauma response, and that's that we numb out. We numb ourselves out when we're feeling overwhelmed. And I saw that in the cloud that some people were feeling overwhelmed. I definitely have had my moments of feeling overwhelmed. And what we tend to do when we're overwhelmed is we numb out and we check out. So whether it's, watching too much TV, guilty, or whether we're eating too much or sleeping too much or smoking too much or drinking too much and doing too much ganja or whatever it is that you do to numb out, that actually, it can feel like self-care, But on one hand, it's actually checking out. What's really being asked of us is to check in. So let me just give a quote from Brene Brown here. She says, and don't you love Brene Brown? She says, we can't selectively numb our emotions. When we numb the painful emotions, we also numb the positive ones. And so positive ones like joy, for instance. Vulnerability sounds like truth, but it feels like courage. And truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. I love this other video of Brene Brown, and she's talking about be uncomfortable. So yeah, sometimes it's uncomfortable to feel all of these things, but that's what we're here to do today, is to just kind of let ourselves feel, let ourselves realize that, yeah, we've maybe been holding our breath and we've maybe been numbing out. And what's really being asked of us is to check in with ourselves. That's how we care for ourselves. Excuse me, I keep going in the wrong direction, but I'm okay. So here's the thing that I was just saying, when we numb our pain, when something is painful and we're feeling overwhelmed, we feel like I just got to check out here. We also, unfortunately, numb our ability to feel joy. Another great quote by somebody I admire a lot, Rebecca Solnit. She says, joy doesn't betray, but it sustains our activism. And when you face politics that aspires to make you fearful or alienated or isolated, joy is a fine act of insurrection. Don't you love that? Yeah, that word insurrection has come up in the last couple of weeks, if you haven't been living under a rock. And so, just knowing that by our joy, by our checking in, by our being with ourselves, by our allowing ourselves to feel our God-given right to feel joy, we are actually we are sustaining our activism, and we are doing our own kind of joyful insurrection. The other thing that can happen with, and this is a trauma response too in its own way, is cynicism. And I wrote something the other night that I thought was kind of smart. That, cynicism, I was like, well, where does this come from? Because sometimes I feel cynical. It's a pessimistic, deeply distrustful emotion, having a sneering disbelief in sincerity and integrity and good. And we've actually been exposed to a lot of cynicism politically. We've been exposed to, from our political leaders around the world, this political cynicism about goodness. And to me, cynicism comes from crushed hopes. So bear with me here on this, that cynicism is a kind of defense against feeling disappointed. When we experience many disappointments, hope just feels risky to us. And trusting that someone will keep their word or support us feels risky. So instead of trusting that, we hide our pain under a veil of cynicism and pessimism. And that way we can be right that no one will be there for us when we need them. And I can remember, though I was homeless for all of my teen years, and even into my 20s, I had unstable housing. And I can remember when I finally got housing and I was, pretty solid, that I was speaking with somebody, and I was going to say, oh, well, you can't have everything. But instead what came out is, oh, well, you can't have anything. And I went, wow, where did that come from? It was this deep belief in me, this deep kind of cynical belief that nobody would be there for me when I really needed them. So when I feel that come up in me, as I hope that you will do, I notice it. I try to notice it. And I try to just be a little tender with myself and realize that came from a time when I didn't have hope, and when my hopes had been crushed too often. So having said all that, and I said I was going to talk about breathing a lot today, and I am. So I have a wonderful self-care exercise for you, 618 breathing. So it's simply that we breathe in for 1, or for 6, we hold for 1, and we breathe out for 8. We exhale for 8 breaths. The longer exhalation than inhalation activates something called the vagus nerve. It's our 10th cranial nerve. And the vagus nerve communicates with our sympathetic nervous system. So that is our fight or flight response. That's what happens when you're afraid of something and your body just says, I got to run or I got to fight it. So the vagus nerve communicates with that sympathetic nervous system to down-regulate it and calm it. So it just goes down, you go, okay, so go to sleep. And the vagus nerve at the same time, it upregulates our parasympathetic nervous system response. And that's where we calm and digest and communicate and heal and all those good things. All right, so let's do this together. When we do breathing exercises, and when I do them, certainly I like to sit down. So if you can sit down, if you're already sitting down, great. Just feel your seat in the chair. If your feet are on the ground, that's great. Another place to ground. I like to close my eyes, so I'm going to do that for a minute. And this is going to help me too. So, you know, I'm a little nervous and nervy about doing this whole webinar thing, and I'm also very excited. So those two things are parallel. And so this is going to help me too. So allow your breathing just to be what it is for now. And I invite you to close your eyes like me. And allow your jaw to relax a little bit. Maybe your tongue will float to the roof of your mouth, and that connects the front and back of your body, the yin and yang of you. And I'm going to count for the first cycle, and maybe we'll just do 3 cycles together. So breathing in for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold for 1. And breathe out for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Great. Let's do a couple more on our own. And just finish up whatever one you're on. Lovely, thank you. So I want to talk about trauma. We have been experiencing a lot of trauma collectively, individually. There's so much that is happening in our world right now, and it's going to continue to happen for a while. We know that, there's over 400,000 people in the US that have died of COVID just in the past year. And all over the world, this is happening. And so this is trauma that we're experiencing collectively, and we're experiencing it individually. And I find it interesting that the word trauma comes from the Greek word for wound. Isn't that interesting? A wound is painful when we're hurt. And a wound hurts to touch it. And we like to keep our wounds covered up. We don't like anyone to see them. And wounds can fester and become infective. And wounds often form scars, which are rigid and inflexible. So that's what can happen with our trauma. It just can become concreted in us, and it can turn into something that just is inflexible. So I wanted to say all this just because we need to be tender with ourselves during this time. There's a lot that we're all experiencing, and we just need to acknowledge it. So as an acupuncturist, I have a great love for Chinese medicine, for East Asian medicine. And when I was a paramedic many years ago and I started getting some acupuncture, that's when I went, wow, this is something that can really help me. And so I decided to quit the ambulance service and go back to school and study. And I found that my teacher, my first teacher at the school I went to, he said that this is when something is important to you, like Chinese medicine, it is your xin shui. So xin shui means heart blood. And certainly this is important to me. So I'm going to give you a crash course in Chinese medicine. there's yin and yang theory, and then there's 5-element theory, and that's what I want to talk about today. They relate to organs and seasons and emotions, and they're all in relation to each other. And the meridian system, where all these lines exist on the body with all these acupoints. And the 5 elements are wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And I'm going to kind of skim through them. The one I want to really focus on today is metal. So that is to do with breathing and the lungs. So the wood element, anger, liver, spring, and the color green. The fire, over exuberance or kind of manic excitement. The heart and the summer and red. And earth, worry, the spleen, late summer and yellow. Water, fear, in the kidneys and winter and black. And then metal, that I really want to focus on with you, is the element of grief. It's the emotion of grief. And the lungs are the one that's the organ that's associated with the metal element. And the season of autumn and the color white. So another part of Chinese medicine is the Chinese astrological chart. So like our normal astrological chart that we all like to use and see in the paper what our sign says for the day, the Chinese zodiac also is 12. And we have been in the year, we are still in the year of the metal rat. And the metal rat is the rat is the first sign of the Chinese zodiac. So the Chinese zodiac year goes until sometime near the end of January or the beginning of February. So this year it'll end on February 11th. So February 12th, we'll be moving into a new year. And I found this, I chose this today to talk about because I found it interesting that the year of the metal rat, that metal pertains to the lungs, if you remember that that's the element of the lungs. And grief and autumn and the color white. In China, when there's a funeral, everybody wears white. And the rat is an extremely social creature. They go everywhere. And so one thing that's been shown through history is that rat years often have epidemic disease. So it's no surprise actually to anybody who studies Chinese astrology that yes, during the year of 2020, it was no surprise that we may have a pandemic, and that's exactly what's been happening. And the part about rats being extremely social, they go everywhere, and so does the virus. So the thing about our lungs and the thing about grief and these two things being hand in hand is grief is quite hard for our society to express. We tend to kind of want to just push it aside or get over it. Anger is much more familiar. And, you know, I think part of what has been going on, especially in the US, is there's been so much to grieve, but we have not had a chance to grieve it because so much craziness has been happening. And so what's happened is anger and rage has bubbled up instead of the grief, which needed to be naturally expressed. And so that's one thing I want to talk to you more about, that and show ways that we can express our grief in healthy ways. We're told that we need to get over it. You know, when you lose somebody that you love, or, you know, something sad happens, we need to get over it as quickly as possible and just kind of get on with the business of life. But I want to quote Stephen Jenkinson here. If you don't know Stephen Jenkinson, check him out, look him up online. He has this whole orphan wisdom site that's really interesting. He says, "Let grief change you. Grief is a way of loving that which has slipped from view. Love is a way of grieving that which is not yet done so, slipped from view." Yeah, he wrote a beautiful book called Die Wise. My favorite book is a big, thick tome. But yeah, definitely worth reading, especially if you have somebody in your life that's ill, and you want to find ways to just express your grief in a healthy way. He's also the subject of a film called Grief Walker. So my question, all of this is food for thought for you, and I'm hoping we'll have time for some discussion. I'm looking at my clock, we're doing pretty good here. I want to know, what do you grieve? What have you been grieving? We've had a lot to grieve, but what are some things that have been difficult for you? And not just the really deep things, but some of the simple things. I grieve, I sing in several choirs, and I grieve not being able to stand there with my arms around the people that I'm singing with and belting out songs and laughing and crying together. It makes me cry to even think about it. And that's a very simple day-to-day thing, but there's so much for us to grieve. So grief can also change us, and that's what it needs to do, actually. Deep grief, we're never the same. We're never the same, and we don't need to be the same, and neither should we be the same. So again, I want to do some self-care with you, how to strengthen our lungs. And I'm not just talking about our physical lungs, but body, mind, and spirit, to strengthen our lungs with something called Qigong. And Qigong just means energy work. So again, let's just get settled again. And I'm going to close my eyes. So you can go ahead and close your eyes. Feel your seat in your chair. Let your breath kind of start to settle down. And when our jaws relax, our tongue just touches the roof of our mouth. And that connects the front of us, which is the yin aspect of our bodies, and the back, which is yang. So it makes this nice circuit if you just allow that tongue to float up in your mouth. So we're just going to do a few cycles of this. We're going to breathe in white to our lungs. So you can imagine I'm looking out at the sky right now, and I can see a white fluffy cloud out there. So you can imagine anything white and filling your lungs up with that. And then we exhale. We're going to exhale grief, and we're going to exhale anything that we don't need. So let's do this 3 times together. Okay, and closing your eyes. And I'm going to make the funny sound. You can go ahead too. Nobody can hear you. So we're going to breathe in white. And just filling up those lungs, the white fluffy cloud. And then we exhale. Si ha. Let's do it again. Breathing in white and filling up those lungs. Just expanding them with a white fluffy cloud. And breathe out. Si ha. And one more time. And breathing in, white fluffy cloud. And breathing out. Si ha. Wonderful. Isn't that great? There's one for each of the 5 elements, which I'll be doing in another session, not today. And this Qigong meditation is probably 2,500 years old. It's something that the ancient Taoist people who didn't have TV or internet or anything, they just had nature, and they looked around them, and they inspired that nature into themselves. It's a beautiful thing. So here's some hope, and something else cool in the Chinese astrology is on February 12th, we will be moving into Chinese New Year and Year of the Metal Ox. So what does an ox do? Ox are solid, dependable, strong animals. They're beasts of burden. We always call them the beast of burden, because what they do is they plow the field, right? They actually pull the metal behind them. It just happens to be metal again for this element of this year, the metal ox. But they pull the plow behind them, and they break new ground and make new paths. I just thought that was cool, and I had to include it in today. And here's another beautiful metaphor about this, plowing the field. Why do we plow fields? We plow them to plant new seeds. So that is exactly what Chinese astrology says about the year of the ox. It is a year for transition. It is a year for planting new seeds. It is a year for turning up new ground and making things new. So I hope that you're starting to feel this transition as the year of the metal ox comes on. And on February 12th, I hope that you'll just give a little cheer for the metal ox. And, this doesn't just say that the metal ox is going to plow the fields and turn over new ground. That depends on us. we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be a year of hard work, but it's going to be very worth it for us to plant those new seeds. Okay, not to forget about the stress test part of today. I did call this stress test because I was watching a video again and being inspired by Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, talking about stress and how he saw this whole COVID experiment that we're under as a stress test. He likened it to a treadmill that cardiac stress test evokes in people that have chest pain. So if somebody's complaining of chest pain or shortness of breath, their doctor will recommend them going to get a stress test, and they get on the treadmill and their chest pain is evoked by the treadmill going faster and faster. So the patient already has this suspected cardiac condition. We're feeling more stress right now, but stress was already present in us. We already had our issues, right? It's just that this has been bringing up a lot for us because some of our stress has maybe been dormant due to our ability to distract ourselves. And during this COVID time, let's face it, there's been less distractions in that we're not going to the bars and restaurant and hanging with friends and traveling to Hawaii. There's a lot that's been taken away from us, and it's brought us back to ourselves. So there's a real value in that. It's not easy. It's not been easy, but there's a real value in that. I want to talk about something called the Bardo. And I actually have something I want to read from Joanna Macy here. Here's in Rebecca's notes. There we go. So the Bardo is a Tibetan term for the state of existence between two incarnations. And there's something called liminal time and space and transitional time. And that to me feels like what we're in right now. We feel like we're kind of in between this rat and ox. We're in between this stage of, so much upheaval in the last few years, and maybe things transitioning to a little bit more peace. So let me read this cool thing to you by Joanna Macy. She says, we're in a space without a map, with the likelihood of economic collapse and climate catastrophe looming. She is a climate person, so she's going to talk about that. And it feels like we're on shifting ground where old habits and old scenarios no longer apply. In Tibetan Buddhism, such a space or a gap between known worlds is called a bardo. It's frightening, and it's also a place of potential transformation. COVID-19 reminds us that apocalypse, in its ancient meaning, connotes revelation and unveiling. And what has it unveiled? Wow, a pandemic so contagious that it immediately revealed our failed healthcare system and our utter interdependence on one another. The need to prioritize the collective nature of our well-being dramatically rose to the surface, especially within our country, which is the most hyper-individualized country in the world. As Malcolm X put it, I love this part, when we change the I for we, even illness becomes wellness. Yeah, so that again is the gift of the time that we're in. And that interdependence that we all have realized how interdependent we are on each other, that when the sooner we start to realize that we can exchange the I for we, then our illness becomes wellness. So just finishing up here, and I wanted to talk about the word radical, because it's not always seen as a word that's positive, but actually the Latin meaning of radical is root. And I learned that from Rebecca Solnit. And she quoted, I was listening to her do another broadcast the other night, so you can tell I've been watching a lot of TV. She said that Gary Snyder, he's a bioregionalist, and he said this many years ago. He actually said the most radical thing we can do is to stay home. So she kind of laughed when she was saying that, because look, we're all staying home, so we're all being radical in some way. So I have a question for you, and that's that: what does staying home mean to you? And what does your gut tell you is most important? To me, staying home isn't just physically staying put in our houses. It's going back to our roots. It's going back to what's going on in our hearts and souls and minds. And it's a opportunity for us to turn inward. And I think that's probably helping, or is happening to us collectively. And I think many of us are doing that just simply because that's what we've got right now. Okay, well, I guess that gets us to the end of our discussion. My question for you, and I'm, I don't want to be the talking head here. I think I've talked enough, but I would love to hear from you, and maybe hear, what has happened, what has changed in you in the past year that's maybe surprised you. I know for myself, I've been surprised by lots of things. I've been surprised by how harsh I can be on myself sometimes, and how I always keep getting the reminder to be gentle, and and that's good for me.